What is up, metal and heavy music fans? It's Flight Icarus again with MetalTrenches.com, and today we have a review of To The Grave and their new album Epilogue via Unique Leader Records. And hey, if you like to be kept up to date with the best and brightest metal bands and albums from the underground and above, then stick with me by hitting that subscribe button down below. To The Grave is a deathcore band out of Sydney, Australia. Kicking off their career with the No Lives Matter EP in 2016, they toured extensively with the likes of Alpha Wolf, Justice for the Damned, and Gravemind. This was followed by their debut full-length album Global Warning in 2019 and another high-profile tour supporting South African darlings Vulvodynia. Epilogue is an interesting next chapter for the band, as it is both a look back and look forward, featuring a remixed and remastered version of the tracks from Global Warning, as well as 7 new songs that were written in 2020. Now, right off the bat, I will say that 19 tracks and over an hour of music is kind of long for a deathcore outing. Normally, that would really put me off, honestly, unless they can really carry the time, but given the context, it does feel more acceptable knowing that this is really a full album and kind of an EP tacked onto it. So to their credit, they make it work, and it ends up being a pretty interesting listen. Starting with the old stuff, which is the first 11 tracks, we've got Ecoside. This one has a great scream to open things up with. Great track to really kick things off. And I gotta say too, maniacal vocals. And that is a driving point of really this entire album that I'm going to keep bringing up over and over again. Lots of variety here in terms of the low gutturals, the high shrieks, kind of everything in between. Think groups like Infant Annihilator. There's also a lot of like really phlegmy, just gross sounding delivery, and I'm all about it. This guy, he's good in my book. And then the rest of this song is very much kind of a chug fest, but it works. It's one of those times where, especially because of the variety in the vocals, it manages to kind of elevate itself beyond just being some dumb caveman music. Wastage has a nice spooky little intro too that ultimately transitions into this heavy, just crushing djent part. And then also we start to hear a little bit more of those sort of mathy sounding guitars come through, which is another element of this band that I really love and think ends up being one of their stronger points. This track also has kind of a Shadow of Intent style, very ominous sort of blackened build to it, which I really enjoy. And then also I love the dynamics here. There's this really quiet part that kind of just like seeps and slithers around and kind of, you're not exactly sure where things are going to go, and then just kicks into this crazy down-tempo breakdown part. And even within that part, there's still that kind of mix of more mathy, more technical guitar flourishes here and there, which is so important. There are so many deathcore bands out there. I know I said this in my review of Distant. If your entire album is just that down-tempo, just blah, 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 like it gets boring. It gets dull, and your whole point is to be heavy, to get people banging their head. And if you're not mixing it up, it starts to just lose its impact over time. Whereas I feel like To The Grave do a great job on this album of kind of using those parts sparingly, playing with dynamics, trying some variation here and there so that when those parts hit, it is fucking catastrophic. And then the other single is Pest Control. This one has an element of kind of darkness to the atmosphere, akin to groups I'd say like Cabal, which, by the way, got an interview with Cabal. Love those guys. Denmark band. If you want to hear some really dark, just blackened sounding deathcore, then you gotta check out Cabal. Heavy focus on brutality with this track. It is just absolutely crushing, and there is a very nice gurgly, croaking, guttural portion on here that is just absolutely disgusting. It's honestly uncanny just how gross it is. I picture like this giant like toad monster just bellowing out this weird noise, and it is, oh, fantastic. Love it, guys. But all the way throughout too, even with the brutality, there's a nice through line of guitar melody going on here, and also a really nice sweeping solo, which again, the guitar players on here do not fuck around. Like, they can clearly play their instruments and just choose to bring out the caveman in us every now and then. For the deeper cuts, I also like Hellhole quite a lot. Honestly, I think this would have been a better single than some of the other ones. Very effective like scream singing section on this one that again just adds to the variation. It's something that kind of like wakes me up out of the hypnotic kind of groove and just regular chug and all that. It was something different that popped out. It had a certain different vibe to it. And speaking of groove, there is an incredible bass groove on this one that really puts the stank on it. Makes the ends of your lips curl down like you're one of the Sopranos. Gristleblower is also appropriately named, which by the way, I was just getting the joke here that it's like a play on whistleblower, but I was thinking more of the idea of just, it sounds like a meat grinder is what this track is. And then The Devil in Sheepskin, very strong highlight on this one, very riff-driven track. Like this is definitely one of the more technical, one of the more mathy overall compositions on the album, and I just love banging my head to it. It also has some of those moments with the guitar with that like dun, 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 like a car stalling or something like that. It's the type of sound you'd expect to hear on like a Frontier album. I love that. I love that sound. And so this track, definitely a highlight of the whole album. And in general too, I gotta say the shorter tracks here are more effective in general. Those tend to be the best ones. Like there's a lot of them that are under that 3-minute mark, and those tend to be the strongest. You get in, you get out, you leave people wanting more, and that's what you want. There's not really any like super long tracks on here, not tracks that I'd say like end up getting boring, but I will say the ones that stretch into the like 4+ almost 5-minute mark probably could be shorter in most cases. So yeah, as far as the material from the first album, it's very heavy. It is a little bit generic at times, but again, thanks to the vocals, those are the main selling point. Those often help carry these compositions along. And then even when things do get a little bit more interesting, a little bit more technical, it does often feel like you're using the same tricks over and over again. But ultimately, they definitely have so much more going on than Distant, just not maybe as much as, say, like a Brand of Sacrifice. Now, as for the newer stuff, we get into the final 8 tracks. Going into the singles there, we had Miserable Summer, another spoopy little intro on this one. Ooh. I will say it is a little too similar to Wastage in this effect, and not quite as strong of a track. Honestly, this is my least favorite of the 3 singles from the new stuff, but it does have kind of this cool effect. I've dubbed this like slow-mo Architects. You hear a lot of people talking about like people ripping off Architects riffs. This is that, except slowed down to like 0.1 speed. It's just in slow motion. So yeah, it's kind of fun in that way. And then it's just also just a violent chug fest. Like this is just a super abrasive, aggressive track. It does have some nice pace changes here and there. I do actually think that the faster part is in 3/8, and you all can correct me on that if I'm wrong. Also more playing with the kind of quiet, loud elements, but ultimately this track ends up being a little bit less memorable for me. I feel like each time I spin the album, I kind of like it less and less, honestly. Now on the flip side, we have Wreck. And this is the track that fucking sold me on To The Grave. This was the first single that I really paid attention to. And I gotta say, it's kind of like a mixed effect of that happening. Because on the one side, you've got, it kicks in the fucking door with the, again, mathcore kind of sounding guitars. Much more, again, a technical sounding track. Lots of riffs, very riff driven overall. But then on the flip side, because this was the first song I really listened to, it set the bar so high that a lot of the other tracks just couldn't live up to it in comparison. So I guess warning in terms of which track you listen to first, and just understand if you're like me and Wreck was the first track that you heard, lower your expectations a little bit, because the whole album is definitely not like that. But yeah, this one, so good. Stank face for days. And I gotta say, when shows start up again, the venue will be fucking destroyed when they play this track. So warning to the the venue owners out there, get your insurance good before you allow them to play Wreck on your stage. But ultimately, I gotta say, this is the best example of their sound. This is what they should be striving for moving forward. And then again, it's just 2.5 minutes long. It sells you fast, and by the end of it, I'm just like, fuck, give me more. And then the third single is Terrorist Threat, which is another standout just on this entire CD. This one has this weird, eerie chirping sound that goes on in the background. It's faster on the fast parts and then slows down for the slower parts, but it just always makes me think I'm in some like weird sort of torture or mind control situation where they're using this to like just fuck with my brain. And it adds this like extra unique layer to the sound, to a composition that otherwise might not be unique. It allows it to stand out, and I remember it. God knows I remember it. And honestly, when I'm listening to it, that chirping noise, it like raises my anxiety level in just the best way. Like, it's anytime a song makes me feel that level of something, whether it be, you know, sadness, joy, or in this case, just uncanny terror, you're doing something right. And then also more fun, chaotic guitar fills amidst the chugs, and also a big, dumb Brie chug fest to close it out, which again, because it's placed within the context of all these other elements, it ends up working. It ends up being absolutely crushing. For deeper cuts here, Kill Shelter is an easy favorite out of the bunch. It stands out with kind of this weird, almost like hip-hop beat sounding intro mixed with some ambient elements, and in that way it kind of reminds me a little bit of Born of Osiris. Again, very solid riffs to back this one up as well, and then glitchy elements mixed in with these like ghostly choral synths, and then they close it all out with a music box of all things. So again, all of those things, when I describe that and I just think about it, I'm like, that sounds like I'm describing a Born of Osiris song. It has differences, but there's a lot of elements there that feel very much inspired by that, and as a Born of Osiris fan, I'm on board. And I couldn't close without mentioning that there is a Ghost of You cover on this album to close things out. And yes, I am talking about the My Chemical Romance song. It actually took me a minute to realize that's what this was, because as I'm just like panning through the track listing and I'm listening to a deathcore album, right? My brain isn't going to My Chemical Romance. So I pushed play on this thing, kind of noticed like, oh, the atmosphere is a little bit different on this one, a little bit more melodic, a little bit kind of sad sounding in comparison to the just bitter anger of everything else. And it wasn't until they got to like the never coming home part, but on here it's never coming home, I was like, wait, I know that. What is that? And I was like, oh, fuck, this is My Chemical Romance. And I've said it before, I'm a connoisseur of the whole like pop goes punk, and like anytime you take a metal band or an alternative band and you take like a pop song or a pop punk song or something and you turn it into something heavier, something else, I am all for that, and they did a great job with this. Like, this is pretty cool. I'm down. I'd like to hear more covers like that, please. So overall, pretty solid album, and again, for 19 tracks, like, that's pretty impressive. I will say that partially, again, because of that, it sort of lacks the same unique personality from track to track of some of my favorite bands. Again, like A Shadow of Intent, A Brand of Sacrifice. And I know I mentioned, like, there are tracks on here that I've been talking about that do have those little different, unique, subtle flair to them. But that's just a snapshot of, again, 19 tracks. So the other tracks that I haven't talked about, they're still solid, they're enjoyable, and they make for a good runtime. It's just that they do kind of start to jumble together. So ultimately, I will say, if you don't already like deathcore, this probably won't be the album to change your mind, but I still, as always, think that it's worth checking out. Like, honestly, anything that, if I took the time to review it, I think it's worth you going out and giving it a listen for yourself. In the end, I'm going to give Epilogue a 9 for enjoyability. Again, for that same reason I just said, I docked it 1 point for, you know, not being consistently top-notch the entire way through, but I gotta give it to him. Like, I had a really good time with this. I've been replaying it, and I plan to replay it a whole lot more moving forward. I give it an 8 for musicianship. There are certain songs on here that I would rate much higher than that I'd give probably a 9, maybe even inching up on a 10 here, but I think if the band really zeroes in on just getting that down for all their songs, and again, striving for their best sound, and really leaning into the fact that they got some fucking wicked guitar players, I could see that easily moving to a 9 on the next album, and maybe even a 10. And I think the added effect of that too will be, I will enjoy the songs more overall, and I will see that 9 in enjoyability get pulled up as well. And then a 7 for innovation. Again, overall, pretty typical deathcore tropes going on here, but done very effectively. So overall, we're looking at a flat 8 and a B-. for To The Grave and Epilogue. Get it once more via Unique Leader Records. Y'all, thanks as always for watching, and let me know down in the comments what did you think of this album, what is your favorite deathcore album so far in 2021, and stick around, I got plenty more videos coming right after this one, more album reviews, tier lists, interviews with bands on the podcast, you name it, we've got it, so plenty of reasons to subscribe if you have not already. If you liked this review, you'd probably also want to check out my one of the Brand of Sacrifice album, Humanity's Last Breath, Distant. I've got quite a few up right now. Also chat with us on Discord and support on Patreon. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.